We approach the summit and the return. You began wanting escape, you now desire embodiment. This is maturity, not getting out of life's weight, but learning how to carry it with meaning. Freedom is not found when nothing binds you, it is found when you willingly bind yourself to what is worthy. The uncommitted soul floats, the devoted soul flies. If you remember only one lesson, let it be this: between stimulus and response, there is a space, in that space is your power, in that power is your freedom. Guard this space as you would guard a child. Stretch it with reflection, protect it with rituals, furnish it with values. Fill it with prayers if you pray, with promises if you vow, with silence if you must listen for the next faithful step. The world grows loud, but you can grow quiet enough to hear your conscience. There you will find instructions fashioned specifically for you. Your suffering has not been meaningless. It has taught you to distinguish the urgent from the important, the loud from the true, the easy from the worthy. It has introduced you to yourself, the self that chooses. And that self, acquainted with limitation, is the only self capable of love. What is love but the decision to will another's good, even when it costs you? What is freedom but the capacity to make that decision repeatedly? What is meaning but the story those decisions tell over a lifetime? Do not postpone your life until conditions improve. Conditions improve when character improves. Begin where you are, one honest sentence, one kept promise, one act of service, one refusal to gossip, one apology, 1 hour of deep work, 1 evening of presence, 1 morning of gratitude. These are not small, these are seeds. Plant them, and let time be the patient gardener. You are not behind. You are beginning again, which is a privilege reserved for the living. Perhaps you feared that to accept suffering as a teacher would make you dreary. Look at you now, more alive, not less. Your laughter has weight to it, your words are seasoned, your eyes recognize fellow travelers by the way their hope refuses to die. You do not need to convince anyone. You only need to continue. Continuation is the arithmetic of transformation, one more faithful step, repeated. The miracle is not that you will avoid the valley, the miracle is that you will keep walking until the valley learns your name and echoes it with respect. Let me bless your path with a final instruction, simple and unflinching: when you do not know what to do the next meaningful thing. Not the next dramatic thing, not the next impressive thing, the next meaningful thing. Meaningful is what aligns with your chosen value and serves a good beyond your ego. Let that be your compass. It will not always point to comfort, but it will always point to freedom. And if night falls, and it will remember that night is not the cancellation of the day but its completion. Rest as a duty to tomorrow, let your sleep be a trust placed in the morning you cannot yet see. Rise when it comes, and greet it with the courage of one who has learned that suffering, though unwelcome, is the only kind of fire that can burn away the ropes that hold you. You do not seek the fire, you seek the freedom it reveals. You do not glorify pain, you glorify the love that walks through pain and refuses to leave anyone behind. So take your stance. Choose your value. Consecrate your wounds. Go to your work and your love and your witness. If you must weep, weep cleanly. If you must rest, rest as stewardship. If you must wait, wait with your hands open to serve. You are not at the mercy of what happens, you are at the mercy of what you choose in response. This mercy is severe and beautiful. It will make you into someone no fear can purchase and no despair can evict. Suffering is not the end of meaning. It is the furnace in which meaning is forged into freedom. And freedom, once forged, becomes the kind of light that does not blind but beckons, the kind of light that says to everyone who sees it, "Come as you are, there is a way through." The world can take many things from you, it cannot take the stance you choose now, so choose, and let that choice be the beginning of your freedom. I have arrived at a place where the echoes of suffering no longer wound, but resonate. They are no longer chains binding me to the past, they are instruments shaping the contours of consciousness, tuning perception to the subtleties of life, sharpening awareness of the profound responsibility that accompanies freedom. In the quiet of reflection, I perceive that the essence of existence is not the avoidance of pain, but the deliberate engagement with it, allowing it to illuminate pathways toward moral clarity, existential depth, and authentic purpose. This awareness demands vigilance. Freedom, fully realized, is never a passive state, it is an active, continuous practice of conscious attention, ethical discernment, and deliberate action. Each decision becomes a reflection of inner sovereignty, a declaration of intentional living. I observe how easily one can drift into habitual thought, passive reaction, or the allure of superficial pleasure. Yet the consciousness trained by adversity perceives the subtle traps of unexamined living. True liberation requires the persistent exercise of awareness, the cultivation of ethical imagination, and the deliberate shaping of the life one inhabits. In the sphere of human relationships, I recognize a responsibility both profound and subtle. Every interaction is an ethical microcosm. The choice to act with empathy, patience, and attentive presence constructs a moral environment, the failure to engage conscientiously diminishes it. Influence is not asserted through domination but through the deliberate modeling of integrity, the extension of understanding, and the attentive consideration of perspectives shaped by experience. Freedom, thus exercised, is inseparable from responsibility. It is the conscious capacity to shape the relational and ethical landscape of one's existence. The temporal nature of life demands that attention be directed with care. Past, present, and future are intertwined, each informing and shaping the other. Reflection on previous choices illuminates patterns, clarifies values, and reveals the consequences of ethical or inattentive action. Anticipation of possible futures guides preparedness, imagination, and foresight. Freedom is exercised dynamically in this temporal continuum, not merely reacting to circumstance, but proactively constructing the life one deems meaningful, shaping character and destiny through conscious, principled engagement with each passing moment. Purpose emerges as the central axis of existence, no longer abstract but actionable. It is not found by chance or bestowed externally, it is crafted consciously, through attention, deliberate choice, and sustained effort. Every act, however minute, becomes a thread in the fabric of a life imbued with significance. The liberated mind perceives that purpose is inseparable from ethical engagement. One cannot act meaningfully in isolation from the moral implications of one's actions, nor can one cultivate true fulfillment apart from attentiveness to the broader consequences of thought and deed. In the realm of work and creation, the application of freedom manifests in ways both practical and profound. Projects undertaken, ideas expressed, guidance offered, and collaboration embraced become vehicles through which consciousness exercises sovereignty. Ethical foresight, deliberate attention, and imagination converge to transform labor into contribution, activity into meaning. Each interaction with material, intellectual, or social constructs is infused with responsibility, ensuring that engagement is not hollow, but deeply integrated with principles and purpose. Solitude continues to function as a crucible of refinement. Beyond the shadows of trauma and the echoes of memory, solitude offers a space in which moral imagination and ethical foresight can expand without interference. Here, one tests choices, envisions consequences, and rehearses deliberate engagement with complexity. Freedom, exercised in this context, is simultaneously internal and external. the mind cultivates sovereignty while preparing to act ethically and attentively in the world beyond reflection. The interplay between joy and responsibility becomes a practice of conscious presence. Happiness is not merely a passive state, it is a medium through which ethical engagement and intentional living are expressed. Gratitude, wonder, and appreciation are intertwined with the exercise of freedom. They require attention, discernment, and moral imagination. The consciousness that has been tempered by adversity perceives abundance not as entitlement, but as opportunity to act conscientiously, to extend care, to cultivate meaning, and to fortify the ethical landscape in which life unfolds. Even in the minutiae of daily existence, freedom and responsibility converge. Each choice, however seemingly inconsequential, carries ripple effects that extend beyond perception. Deciding how to respond to a word, an action, or an event demands attentiveness, foresight, and ethical judgment. The consciousness trained by suffering recognizes that liberty is inseparable from responsibility, that meaning is constructed continuously, and that the cultivation of intentional presence transforms ordinary life into an ongoing exercise of freedom and significance. Memory, anticipation, and deliberate action form a triad through which existence is navigated with clarity and purpose. Reflection on past experiences illuminates patterns and consequences, while anticipation of possible futures guides preparedness and imagination. Action, informed by both reflection and foresight, becomes intentional, ethical, and meaningful. Freedom, in this dynamic interplay, is active, continuous, and inseparable from responsibility. It is the conscious shaping of life through principled, attentive engagement. As I stand at the threshold of the present, I perceive life as a canvas of infinite possibility, where every decision, thought, and act contributes to the texture of existence. The consciousness shaped by suffering no longer fears uncertainty, it engages it with deliberate attention and moral discernment. Freedom is now understood as the capacity to respond consciously, to shape reality through ethical and intentional action, and to weave meaning into every aspect of life. It is not simply the liberty to choose but the responsibility to act in accordance with purpose and principle. Legacy becomes a living concept, not an abstract aspiration. Every interaction, every choice, and every contribution is a thread in a tapestry that extends beyond the boundaries of my own life. Influence is measured not by recognition but by the subtle, lasting effects of principled engagement. Mentorship, guidance, and acts of moral presence ripple outward, shaping the ethical climate of communities, organizations, and relationships. Conscious freedom, therefore, is inseparable from the duty to construct a life that leaves a meaningful imprint on the world. Reflection upon personal suffering reveals its transformative power. Pain, when internalized with attentiveness, strengthens moral imagination and ethical foresight. It sharpens perception, illuminates values, and cultivates resilience. The mind trained by adversity recognizes that suffering is not an obstacle to freedom but the medium through which its deepest expression is realized. By embracing the lessons embedded in hardship, consciousness becomes capable of deliberate, principled action, cultivating significance where passivity would otherwise prevail. Responsibility emerges as both burden and liberation. To act consciously is to acknowledge the profound weight of choice, to recognize that every action carries consequences, and to navigate life with ethical vigilance. In this framework, freedom is inseparable from accountability. The deliberate exercise of responsibility transforms ordinary life into a continuous practice of meaning-making, a conscious orchestration of choices aligned with principles, values, and the broader welfare of others. Time, once perceived as relentless and unforgiving, now functions as a medium for intentional construction of life. Past experiences, present awareness, and future aspirations converge into an integrated framework for deliberate action. Memory informs judgment, reflection guides attention, and anticipation shapes preparedness. Freedom operates dynamically within this temporal structure, enabling the consciousness to act decisively, ethically, and meaningfully across the continuum of existence. Human relationships reveal the interplay of freedom, responsibility, and influence most vividly. Each interaction carries potential for ethical engagement or moral erosion. The liberated consciousness exercises attentiveness, empathy, and foresight, recognizing that even the smallest gesture and expression of patience, understanding, or encouragement resonates beyond immediate perception. By acting conscientiously within relationships, freedom is realized as both personal sovereignty and the capacity to positively shape the world around us. Purpose, fully integrated, becomes a guiding principle rather than a fluctuating aim. It aligns attention, intention, and action, creating coherence across the myriad dimensions of life. Work, creation, community engagement, and personal reflection are no longer disparate activities but interwoven threads of a unified existential practice. The conscious pursuit of purpose transforms challenges into opportunities for growth, suffering into instruments of insight, and ordinary experiences into vehicles for meaning and moral expression. Solitude continues to serve as the laboratory for deep ethical and existential work. In isolation, the mind rehearses choices, tests principles, and cultivates foresight. It confronts shadows of doubt, fear, and unresolved pain, integrating them into a coherent framework of understanding. Solitude is no longer merely absence, it is deliberate engagement with one's inner world, a space where freedom is exercised fully, sovereignty is affirmed, and ethical clarity is strengthened in preparation for the demands of the external world. Gratitude and wonder transform into active practices, embedding ethical awareness into the experience of life. Recognizing beauty, appreciating connection, and engaging fully with the present moment reinforce attentiveness and intentionality. These practices elevate daily existence from mere survival or routine to conscious participation in the moral and existential unfolding of life. Happiness is no longer an accident of circumstance but a reflection of deliberate, principled engagement with the world. Memory, imagination, and foresight operate in a triad that continuously shapes action. Reflection on past experience clarifies patterns and consequences. Imagination explores possibilities, anticipating moral and practical challenges. Foresight informs deliberate, principled action. In this triad, freedom is not passive, it is dynamic, proactive, and ethically integrated. Every choice, from the most minor to the most consequential, becomes an assertion of sovereignty, a contribution to meaning, and an extension of responsibility into the fabric of existence. Suffering, once externalized as circumstance beyond control, now exists as a tool for ethical and existential growth. The lessons embedded in pain illuminate principles of resilience, moral discernment, and conscious engagement. The consciousness trained by adversity perceives opportunity in every challenge, clarity in every confusion, and meaning in every encounter. Freedom is realized fully when suffering is transformed into insight, hardship into deliberation, and limitation into ethical and existential expansion. Work, creation, and action converge with reflection, ethical attention, and moral imagination to produce a life that is integrated, coherent, and meaningful. Influence is wielded not through coercion but through principled presence and conscientious engagement. Each decision reinforces integrity, shapes legacy, and extends significance. The liberated consciousness recognizes that the pursuit of excellence in thought, action, and moral engagement is inseparable from the exercise of true freedom. As I contemplate the horizon of life, I perceive that the ultimate expression of freedom lies in the integration of all lessons, suffering transformed into insight, adversity refined into moral clarity, loss reconciled with legacy, and action aligned with purpose. Conscious engagement with every dimension of existence, temporal, relational, ethical, and creative, constructs a life of enduring significance. The liberated mind understands that true freedom is inseparable from responsibility, that meaning is actively created, and that moral and existential sovereignty is continuously exercised in every decision, moment, and act. The culmination of this realization is profound. To live fully is to act deliberately, to engage ethically, and to construct meaning consciously. Suffering is the gateway, reflection the compass, and action the bridge connecting insight to reality. Freedom is no longer abstract, it is tangible, realized in thought, word, and deed. The life thus created is not measured by comfort, recognition, or ease, but by the depth of attention, the integrity of action, and the enduring resonance of meaning in oneself and the world. And so, with the consciousness forged through suffering, guided by ethical clarity, and animated by deliberate purpose, I step forward into the final unfolding of life. Every encounter, every challenge, and every moment becomes an opportunity to exercise freedom fully, construct meaning intentionally, and leave a legacy of principled, reflective, and transformative presence. The journey is continuous, the responsibility immense, and the reward profound, a life lived in sovereign alignment with truth, integrity, and the deepest principles of human existence. As I stand at the threshold of the unfolding life, I realize that every breath, every movement, every thought carries the weight of consequence and the potential for transformation. Freedom, once sought in the absence of chains, now reveals itself as the conscious orchestration of existence, the deliberate shaping of reality through ethical attention, purposeful action, and the attentive cultivation of meaning. The mind tempered by suffering recognizes the profound truth: liberty without responsibility is illusion, and existence without deliberate engagement is vacuous. Every encounter is an opportunity to enact freedom. The simplest gestures, words of encouragement, patient listening, acts of service resonate far beyond immediate perception, shaping the moral and emotional landscape of others. Influence, wielded with care and awareness, becomes the currency of significance. The liberated consciousness understands that impact is not measured by applause or recognition but by the subtle, enduring effects of ethical presence and principled action. Each act, intentional and attentive, reverberates across the fabric of human experience, weaving a legacy that endures long after the moment has passed. Reflection upon suffering unveils its hidden gifts. Pain, when confronted and internalized consciously, becomes a lens through which the world is perceived more clearly. Adversity clarifies values, sharpens judgment, and cultivates moral imagination. The mind that has walked through fire recognizes the fragility and the profundity of life. It knows that meaning is not found in comfort or avoidance, but in deliberate engagement with the realities that challenge, demand, and transform. Suffering, far from diminishing freedom, illuminates it. It reveals the pathways by which consciousness may exercise sovereignty, resilience, and ethical clarity. Time, once relentless and overwhelming, is now a medium for deliberate construction of life. Past experiences inform judgment, revealing patterns and consequences. Present awareness guides intention, anchoring action in principle. Anticipation of possible futures fosters foresight, imagination, and preparation. Freedom is exercised dynamically within this temporal continuum. Every moment is both a canvas and a crucible, where thought, choice, and action converge to construct meaning. Life becomes an ongoing act of creation, a continuous interplay of reflection, attention, and deliberate engagement. Purpose, fully internalized, is the axis around which existence rotates. It is neither abstract nor static, it is active, realized through deliberate thought and principled action. Work, relationships, community engagement, and personal reflection are not isolated endeavors but interwoven threads in a coherent tapestry of significance. Every choice aligns with this central axis, transforming ordinary life into a continuous exercise of freedom, responsibility, and intentionality. Purpose infuses every act with direction, every decision with resonance, and every interaction with meaning. Solitude, far from isolation, becomes the sanctum in which consciousness refines itself. In quiet reflection, ethical imagination rehearses decisions, foresight anticipates dilemmas, and the shadows of doubt and fear are confronted and integrated. Here, the mind cultivates sovereignty and attentiveness, preparing to engage the world with clarity, integrity, and intentionality. Solitude is the space where freedom is consolidated, and where the consciousness rehearses the ethical, emotional, and existential engagement that will define life's trajectory. Gratitude, wonder, and attentiveness transform into daily practices of ethical and existential significance. Recognizing beauty, embracing joy, and extending care and empathy become deliberate acts of conscious engagement. Pleasure and abundance are not distractions but instruments for the reinforcement of ethical attention and purposeful action. The mind trained by suffering perceives that every experience, whether joyous or challenging, is an opportunity to exercise freedom, construct meaning, and fortify the moral and existential fabric of life. Memory, anticipation, and deliberate action converge into an integrated process through which life is navigated with coherence and intentionality. Reflection illuminates past patterns, imagination explores possible futures, and conscious action bridges insight with reality. Freedom is active, continuous, and inseparable from responsibility. It is the deliberate orchestration of thought, choice, and moral presence, ensuring that each moment contributes meaningfully to the construction of a coherent, principled, and impactful life. The ultimate expression of freedom reveals itself in the integration of all lessons, suffering transformed into insight, adversity refined into moral clarity, loss reconciled with legacy, and action aligned with purpose. Conscious engagement with existence, temporal, relational, ethical, and creative constructs a life of enduring significance. The liberated mind perceives that meaning is not discovered passively but created actively, that moral sovereignty is exercised continuously, and that responsibility is inseparable from liberty. Every act becomes a testament, every choice a declaration, every moment an opportunity to assert ethical and existential presence. The consciousness forged by suffering, tempered by reflection, and animated by deliberate purpose steps into the world fully, with clarity, integrity, and intention. Legacy is not an abstraction but a continuous outcome of principled engagement. The influence of one life ripples outward, shaping the ethical, emotional, and existential landscape of others. Suffering, freedom, responsibility, and meaning converge into a singular realization. The life of true significance is not measured by comfort, recognition, or avoidance of pain, but by the depth of attention, the consistency of principle, and the deliberate construction of meaning. To live fully is to act consciously, to navigate complexity with foresight and integrity, and to leave the world enriched by presence, thought, and ethical action. And so, as the horizon of life stretches infinitely before me, I stand fully awake, fully responsible, fully free. Every thought is deliberate, every act principled, every engagement intentional. The journey through suffering has revealed the path, reflection has illuminated it, and deliberate action has made it real. Freedom, fully realized, is not an abstract ideal but a lived reality, the continuous, conscious, and principled construction of a life imbued with meaning, impact, and enduring moral and existential resonance. In this final awakening, I understand that the journey is continuous, yet complete in its clarity. The mind, liberated through adversity, tempered by insight, and animated by purpose, is prepared to act with unwavering attention, integrity, and deliberate presence. Life itself becomes an expression of freedom, a testament to the transformative power of suffering, and a legacy of meaning that endures beyond the boundaries of individual existence. The ultimate truth stands unshakable: suffering is not the obstacle to freedom, it is its forge. Adversity shapes consciousness, reflection hones understanding, and deliberate action realizes potential. To live is to engage, to suffer is to learn, and to act consciously is to construct the life of profound significance that every human being is capable of attaining. Here, in this integration of insight, responsibility, and purpose, the journey reaches its most expansive expression, a life lived fully, consciously, and meaningfully, echoing into the world with clarity, integrity, and enduring resonance. I have arrived at a juncture in life where every experience converges into a single, coherent understanding. The consciousness tempered by suffering, refined through reflection, and guided by deliberate purpose is capable of exercising a freedom that is absolute in its depth and responsibility. In this awareness, liberty is no longer a concept but a continuous practice, one that integrates thought, action, moral discernment, and the intentional shaping of existence. The mind, once constrained by fear, uncertainty, and the shadow of trauma, now perceives that every moment, no matter how ordinary or seemingly insignificant, is a canvas for the deliberate construction of meaning. The first recognition is that freedom is inseparable from responsibility. It is not merely the absence of constraint, but the conscious capacity to respond to life's complexities with intentionality, integrity, and ethical awareness. Every decision becomes a declaration of sovereignty, every act an assertion of deliberate presence in the moral and existential landscape. I have witnessed that those who avoid responsibility, even under the guise of comfort or survival, sacrifice the depth of their own freedom. True liberty is measured not by the lack of external pressure, but by the rigor with which consciousness engages its own choices and shapes reality through principled action. Every encounter is a potential crucible for ethical and existential engagement. Relationships, from the most intimate to the seemingly peripheral, demand attentiveness, empathy, and foresight. Even minor gestures, an expression of encouragement, a patient listening, or the deliberate offering of understanding, carry consequences far beyond immediate perception. Influence is not wielded through coercion but through presence, intentionality, and principled engagement. The consciousness shaped by suffering recognizes that moral and existential impact accumulates in the minutiae of daily life, where consistent attentiveness builds a legacy of significance and ethical resonance. Reflection on suffering reveals its hidden potential to illuminate freedom. Pain, adversity, and loss are not mere obstacles but instruments through which consciousness becomes attuned to its deepest responsibilities and capacities. Hardship clarifies values, strengthens moral imagination, and cultivates resilience. In moments of profound challenge, the mind is forced to confront limitations, confront fear, and decide whether to act with integrity or retreat into self-preservation. Every deliberate response becomes a testament to the capacity for conscious engagement, an affirmation of the sovereignty that emerges through adversity. Time, once experienced as relentless and uncontrollable, now serves as the medium through which freedom is exercised consciously. The past informs judgment, revealing patterns and consequences. The present anchors intention, grounding action in principle. The future stimulates imagination and foresight, allowing preparation and ethical anticipation. Freedom operates dynamically across this temporal continuum, enabling the consciousness to navigate uncertainty with clarity and purpose. Life, therefore, is understood as an ongoing exercise in deliberate engagement, where each moment contributes to the construction of a coherent and meaningful existence. Purpose becomes the guiding axis around which all aspects of life rotate. It is neither abstract nor imposed, it is cultivated, internalized, and continuously enacted through deliberate action. Every engagement work, creation, mentorship, personal reflection is interwoven with this central axis, creating coherence and intentionality. The pursuit of purpose transforms challenges into opportunities for growth, suffering into instruments of insight, and ordinary experiences into vehicles for ethical and existential significance. The liberated consciousness recognizes that meaning is constructed moment by moment, choice by choice, and action by action. Solitude, far from representing emptiness, becomes the crucible in WH. Gratitude, wonder, and attentiveness transform daily life into a continuous practice of conscious engagement. Beauty, connection, and joy are not passive experiences but deliberate acts of presence and ethical attention. Pleasure and abundance, rather than being distractions, reinforce moral and existential awareness. The consciousness trained by adversity perceives that every encounter, sensation, or opportunity is an occasion to exercise freedom, construct meaning, and cultivate ethical and existential presence. Living attentively, with conscious appreciation for both the ordinary and extraordinary, becomes a form of sustained, deliberate practice in ethical freedom. Memory, imagination, and deliberate action converge into a triadic process through which life is navigated with clarity, coherence, and integrity. Reflection illuminates past patterns and consequences, imagination anticipates possibilities and ethical challenges, action translates insight into reality. Freedom, in this dynamic interplay, is active, continuous, and inseparable from responsibility. Every thought, choice, and engagement contributes to the ongoing construction of life, meaning, and ethical presence. Consciousness is both the observer and the architect of its own journey. Suffering, far from being a hindrance, becomes the instrument of profound insight. The consciousness that has endured adversity internalizes lessons of resilience, discernment, and ethical vigilance. Pain illuminates the paths of choice, clarifies moral and existential priorities, and cultivates the attentiveness necessary for deliberate engagement with life. The mind shaped by suffering recognizes opportunity within every challenge, clarity within confusion, and meaning within the ordinary. Freedom is realized when suffering is transformed into insight, limitation into deliberate action, and adversity into the fuel for moral and existential expansion. Work, creation, and action merge seamlessly with reflection, ethical attention, and moral imagination to construct a life of coherence, significance, and enduring impact. Influence is wielded not through force or recognition but through principled engagement and deliberate presence. Each choice reinforces integrity, shapes legacy, and extends meaning into the fabric of life. The liberated consciousness perceives that the pursuit of excellence in thought, action, and moral engagement is inseparable from the full exercise of freedom and the construction of enduring significance. As I contemplate the totality of life, the ultimate revelation emerges: true freedom is inseparable from suffering, responsibility, and conscious engagement. Every act of attentiveness, every deliberate choice, every exercise of ethical presence contributes to the continuous construction of meaning. Legacy is neither abstract nor contingent on recognition, it is the cumulative effect of principled engagement, deliberate action, and conscious attention to the consequences of thought and deed. The life of significance is measured not by comfort or survival, but by the depth of ethical presence, the consistency of deliberate engagement, and the enduring resonance of meaning created through consciousness. The realization of freedom is inseparable from the understanding of consequence. Every action, no matter how subtle or seemingly inconsequential, carries ripples that extend beyond immediate perception. A word spoken with care, a gesture offered with intention, a decision made with reflection all reverberate through the lives of others and the fabric of existence itself. The consciousness shaped by suffering recognizes that significance is built in these small, deliberate moments, where attention, integrity, and ethical awareness intersect. Freedom is not merely a personal state, it is a continuous contribution to the moral and existential landscape surrounding us. Responsibility is not a burden but a form of liberation. To act consciously, to evaluate the ethical dimensions of choice, to respond deliberately rather than reactively, is to exercise the sovereignty of the mind. This active engagement with life transforms the individual from a passive observer into a conscious architect of experience. Every decision, from the most ordinary to the most profound, becomes a reflection of values internalized through reflection and refined by adversity. In this way, freedom is realized not as the absence of constraint, but as the full exercise of conscious agency and ethical presence. Relationships reveal the profound interplay between freedom and responsibility. Every interaction, whether intimate or casual, is an ethical microcosm. The choice to listen, to empathize, to act with patience, and to extend understanding shapes the moral texture of human connection. Conversely, inattention, indifference, or self-centered action erodes both personal integrity and the ethical landscape of others. The consciousness tempered by suffering perceives these dynamics clearly. Liberty without attentiveness is hollow, and presence without responsibility is transient. True freedom is exercised relationally as much as individually, in the deliberate cultivation of impact, care, and principled engagement. Suffering, experienced and reflected upon consciously, becomes the instrument of profound insight. Pain reveals the limits and capacities of the self, illuminates values previously obscured, and refines ethical and existential discernment. The mind trained by adversity recognizes that hardship is not an impediment to meaningful engagement but the crucible through which clarity, resilience, and insight emerge. Every challenge becomes an opportunity to act deliberately, to cultivate presence, and to integrate experience into a coherent, principled, and intentional life. Time, when perceived consciously, is no longer a linear constraint but a medium for intentional construction. Past experiences inform judgment, revealing patterns and consequences that guide future action. Present awareness anchors decisions in principle, grounding thought and behavior in ethical attentiveness. Anticipation of potential outcomes fosters foresight, imagination, and preparation. Freedom, exercised across this temporal continuum, is dynamic, continuous, and integrated, a conscious orchestration of reflection, judgment, and principled action. Each moment becomes a deliberate opportunity to shape meaning, impact, and moral presence. Purpose crystallizes as the axis of deliberate existence. It is not an abstract ideal but a continuously enacted principle that aligns thought, intention, and action. Work, creation, mentorship, and personal reflection become interwoven expressions of a singular existential project, the cultivation of significance. The pursuit of purpose transforms suffering into insight, challenge into growth, and ordinary action into meaningful contribution. The liberated consciousness understands that life itself is the material of meaning, and that every deliberate engagement reinforces the coherence, depth, and ethical resonance of existence. Solitude is not an absence but a laboratory for the refinement of consciousness. In reflective isolation, the mind rehearses ethical responses, anticipates dilemmas, and integrates the shadows of fear, doubt, and unresolved trauma. Here, sovereignty and attentiveness are consolidated, preparing the individual to act decisively and ethically in the wider world. Solitude becomes a continuous practice of moral and existential refinement, where freedom is both exercised and deepened, and where the foundations of deliberate, impactful living are fortified. Gratitude and wonder, when consciously cultivated, reinforce the integration of freedom, responsibility, and meaning. The recognition of beauty, the embrace of joy, and the mindful attention to experience are not passive states but deliberate acts of ethical and existential engagement. Pleasure and abundance are transformed from distractions into instruments of moral and reflective presence. The consciousness trained by suffering understands that every encounter, sensation, or opportunity is a chance to exercise freedom, construct meaning, and affirm ethical and existential sovereignty. Memory, imagination, and deliberate action function as a triad guiding the exercise of conscious freedom. Reflection illuminates past lessons, revealing patterns of consequence and insight. Imagination explores potential futures, rehearsing ethical decisions and anticipating challenges. Deliberate action bridges insight with reality, translating understanding into principled engagement. Freedom is active, continuous, and inseparable from responsibility. Each thought, choice, and act is an opportunity to shape life intentionally, ethically, and meaningfully. Suffering becomes the medium through which freedom reaches its full expression. Pain, adversity, and loss are transformed into instruments of clarity, resilience, and ethical insight. The consciousness forged in the crucible of hardship recognizes that limitation and challenge are not impediments to meaningful existence but the conditions through which deliberate, principled engagement is realized. Opportunity and clarity are embedded in every moment of difficulty, and freedom is exercised most fully when suffering is internalized, understood, and integrated into intentional action. Work, creativity, and ethical action converge seamlessly with reflection and foresight to construct a life of coherence, significance, and enduring impact. Influence is exercised not through authority or recognition but through principled engagement, attentive presence, and deliberate contribution. Each act reinforces integrity, extends legacy, and ensures that meaning is constructed continuously. The pursuit of excellence in thought, moral engagement, and practical action becomes inseparable from the full realization of freedom and the ongoing creation of significance. As the horizon of life unfolds, the ultimate understanding emerges: freedom, suffering, responsibility, and purpose converge into a singular principle. The life of profound significance is not defined by comfort, survival, or superficial recognition, but by the depth of attention, the consistency of ethical engagement, and the deliberate construction of meaning. Legacy is created in the cumulative practice of principled, conscious action, extending influence and ethical presence beyond the individual self. The liberated mind recognizes that significance is a living process, constructed moment by moment, choice by choice, and act by act. Every act becomes a testament, every decision a declaration, every moment a conscious exercise of ethical and existential sovereignty. The consciousness shaped by suffering, tempered by reflection, and animated by deliberate purpose moves forward fully, with clarity, integrity, and intention. Influence is wielded responsibly, legacy is continuously constructed, and life itself becomes an expression of freedom, meaning, and principled engagement. As I move deeper into the contemplation of existence, I realize that the mind tempered by suffering possesses a clarity unavailable to those who have never faced profound adversity. Pain becomes a teacher, adversity a guide, and reflection a tool for navigating the complexities of human life. Each experience, no matter how challenging or uncomfortable, contains within it the seeds of insight, ethical awareness, and existential growth. Freedom is exercised not by avoiding these experiences, but by engaging with them consciously, interpreting them wisely, and acting in accordance with the principles discovered through their study. The liberation that emerges from suffering is both delicate and profound. It is a sovereignty of the inner self, a capacity to act intentionally, ethically, and with full awareness of the consequences. Yet it is also a burden, for with understanding comes responsibility, the responsibility to shape life, influence others, and construct meaning consciously. This responsibility is not optional, it is inseparable from true freedom. The liberated consciousness cannot act arbitrarily or without reflection, it must weigh every choice, anticipate every consequence, and integrate every decision into a coherent moral and existential framework. Human relationships serve as both the medium and the measure of freedom exercised. Every connection is an opportunity to practice attentiveness, empathy, and principled engagement. The smallest gestures, a word spoken with care, a listening ear extended without judgment, a deliberate act of patience create ripples that extend far beyond immediate perception. In contrast, neglect, indifference, or careless action diminishes the ethical and existential integrity of the individual and the collective. The consciousness shaped by suffering perceives that every interaction carries weight, and that meaningful engagement is an expression of freedom as much as it is a reflection of ethical responsibility. Suffering illuminates the pathways of moral and existential clarity. It sharpens the mind, focusing attention on what truly matters, clarifying values, and cultivating the moral imagination necessary for deliberate action. Adversity forces confrontation with fear, limitation, and the inevitability of loss. How one responds to these conditions defines the quality of existence, the depth of freedom, and the coherence of meaning. The mind trained by hardship recognizes that insight and growth emerge not from comfort but from challenge, not from avoidance but from the active, principled engagement with reality as it is. Time is the medium in which freedom is continuously exercised. Past experiences inform judgment, revealing patterns, consequences, and the moral texture of action. The present moment anchors attention, grounding thought and behavior in ethical clarity and deliberate engagement. Anticipation of the future fosters foresight, imagination, and preparation, allowing conscious navigation of life's uncertainties. The liberated consciousness moves fluidly across this temporal spectrum, using reflection, awareness, and intentionality to transform each moment into an opportunity for ethical and existential construction. Purpose becomes the guiding principle of every act, thought, and decision. It is neither imposed nor abstract, it is cultivated consciously, internalized, and enacted in all dimensions of life. Work, creation, mentorship, and personal reflection converge as expressions of this central axis, producing coherence, alignment, and depth. The pursuit of purpose transforms suffering into insight, challenge into opportunity, and ordinary experiences into instruments of significance. Freedom is realized in this integration, where life is no longer a series of disconnected events, but a deliberate, coherent, and meaningful project. Solitude is the crucible in which ethical and existential capacities are refined. In reflective isolation, the mind rehearses choices, anticipates dilemmas, and integrates the shadows of fear, doubt, and unresolved pain. Sovereignty and attentiveness are consolidated, preparing the individual to act decisively, consciously, and ethically in the wider world. Here, freedom is exercised fully, not passively, and ethical clarity is strengthened in preparation for engagement with the complexities of human existence. Gratitude and wonder, cultivated consciously, reinforce the integration of freedom, responsibility, and meaning. Recognition of beauty, appreciation of connection, and mindful engagement with the present transform daily experience into a deliberate practice of ethical and existential attention. Pleasure and abundance are instruments for reinforcing moral vigilance and reflective presence. Every encounter, sensation, or opportunity becomes a platform to exercise freedom, construct significance, and integrate experience into a coherent framework of intentional, ethical living. Memory, imagination, and deliberate action function as a triad guiding life. Reflection illuminates past experiences and patterns, revealing consequences and lessons. Imagination anticipates potential futures, exploring ethical possibilities and preparing the mind for principled decision-making. Deliberate action translates understanding into tangible outcomes, bridging insight with reality. Freedom, in this dynamic triad, is continuous, active, and inseparable from responsibility. Every thought, choice, and act is an opportunity to shape existence intentionally, ethically, and meaningfully. Suffering transforms into a medium of insight and empowerment. Adversity clarifies priorities, cultivates resilience, and strengthens ethical and existential capacities. The mind forged through hardship perceives opportunity and clarity where others perceive only limitation. Freedom is exercised fully when pain is internalized, reflected upon, and translated into deliberate, principled action. Every challenge becomes a catalyst for growth, every loss a teacher, and every difficulty an invitation to engage consciously with life's deeper truths. Work, creativity, and action merge with reflection, foresight, and ethical attentiveness to construct a coherent, significant, and impactful life. Influence is wielded not through recognition or authority but through principled engagement and conscious presence. Each act strengthens integrity, extends legacy, and contributes to a life rich in meaning. Excellence in thought, moral judgment, and deliberate action becomes inseparable from the exercise of freedom and the ongoing construction of significance. As the horizon of existence extends, the ultimate truth emerges: freedom, suffering, responsibility, and purpose are inseparably intertwined. Life of profound significance is measured not by comfort, survival, or recognition, but by the depth of attentiveness, consistency of ethical engagement, and deliberate construction of meaning. Legacy is a living, cumulative product of principled, intentional engagement, extending influence and moral presence beyond the individual. Consciousness shaped by adversity recognizes that significance is constructed continuously, moment by moment, choice by choice, and act by act. I have come to understand that the highest expression of freedom is inseparable from the mastery of the inner self. The consciousness that has endured suffering, reflected upon it deeply, and acted with deliberate purpose achieves a sovereignty that is profound, resilient, and ethically grounded. True freedom does not lie in the absence of constraint or adversity, it resides in the capacity to respond with awareness, integrity, and deliberate choice, even in the face of limitation, fear, or loss. Each moment, no matter how fleeting or mundane, becomes a canvas upon which consciousness can assert meaning, exercise ethical presence, and shape life according to principle. The interplay between freedom and responsibility becomes increasingly clear. To live fully is to recognize that every choice, every act, and every thought carries weight. Consequence is not external, it is woven into the fabric of existence itself. To act deliberately, to anticipate outcomes, and to align decisions with ethical and existential clarity is to exercise the deepest form of liberty. Conversely, avoidance, negligence, or indifference diminishes freedom, for it relinquishes sovereignty to circumstance and habit. Consciousness shaped by suffering understands that responsibility is not a burden imposed from without, but the very essence of liberty realized. Relationships illuminate the practical dimensions of this understanding. Every interaction, from casual encounters to intimate connections, provides the opportunity to practice attention, empathy, and principled engagement. A single word spoken with care, a gesture of patience, or an act of listening without judgment reverberates far beyond immediate perception. Influence is not achieved through dominance, manipulation, or recognition. It is exercised through presence, integrity, and the deliberate alignment of action with values. The liberated mind perceives that meaningful relationships are both the measure and medium of freedom in action. Suffering, when approached consciously, becomes the teacher of freedom. Pain clarifies priorities, strengthens judgment, and cultivates moral imagination. Adversity compels reflection and forces confrontation with fear, doubt, and the limits of self. Those who endure with awareness recognize that hardship is not an impediment to a life of meaning but the very instrument through which consciousness exercises sovereignty, refines insight, and develops resilience. Every challenge offers the opportunity to act with intention, to transform limitation into capacity, and to integrate experience into a coherent, principled, and meaningful existence. Time emerges as a dimension in which freedom is enacted continuously. Past experiences, with their lessons and consequences, inform judgment. Present awareness grounds attention, guiding deliberate and ethical action. Anticipation of future possibilities cultivates foresight, imagination, and preparation. The mind liberated through reflection and adversity navigates this temporal spectrum with intentionality, transforming each moment into a deliberate opportunity to construct meaning, exercise agency, and contribute ethically to the world. Freedom is not a state, it is a practice performed moment by moment, choice by choice. Purpose, once internalized, becomes the axis of existence. It is enacted not through abstract contemplation, but through deliberate action, ethical engagement, and the alignment of all efforts with coherent existential principles. Work, creativity, mentorship, and self-reflection are integrated into a single project, the construction of a meaningful life. Through this alignment, suffering is transformed into insight, challenge into growth, and ordinary experiences into instruments of significance. The liberated mind understands that the cultivation of purpose is continuous, moment to moment, and inseparable from the exercise of freedom. Solitude is the laboratory in which consciousness hones its capacities. In reflection, the mind rehearses ethical decisions, anticipates challenges, and integrates fear, doubt, and past suffering. In this space, sovereignty, attentiveness, and clarity are consolidated, preparing the individual to act decisively and ethically in the wider world. Solitude is not absence, it is engagement with the self at the deepest level, a preparation for action, and a cultivation of the freedom that arises from reflection, awareness, and deliberate choice. Gratitude and wonder transform everyday life into a continuous practice of attention, ethical engagement, and existential presence. Recognition of beauty, the embrace of joy, and mindful participation in the present moment are deliberate acts that reinforce freedom, responsibility, and meaning. Pleasure and abundance are not distractions but instruments that support reflective attention and ethical awareness. Consciousness trained through suffering perceives that every encounter, every sensation, and every opportunity is a platform for exercising freedom, creating significance, and cultivating ethical and existential sovereignty. Memory, imagination, and deliberate action converge as a triad that guides the construction of life. Reflection illuminates past lessons, revealing patterns, consequences, and insight. Imagination explores potential futures, rehearsing choices, anticipating ethical dilemmas, and cultivating foresight. Deliberate action translates insight into reality, bridging understanding with tangible engagement. Freedom is enacted dynamically within this triad, active, continuous, and inseparable from responsibility. Every thought, decision, and act becomes a vehicle for constructing life, meaning, and ethical presence intentionally. Suffering, integrated consciously, is the forge of freedom. Pain and adversity reveal the fragility of existence, the urgency of purpose, and the necessity of principled engagement. The mind shaped by challenge perceives clarity where others see confusion, and opportunity where others perceive limitation. Limitation becomes a catalyst for insight, adversity a teacher of resilience, and loss an instrument for ethical and existential growth. True freedom emerges when suffering is internalized, reflected upon, and transformed into deliberate, principled action, integrating adversity into the architecture of meaningful life. As I continue this reflection, I perceive that true freedom is inseparable from conscious engagement with the world. It is not merely an internal state but a lived practice, exercised in thought, word, and action. Every choice, from the simplest gesture to the grandest decision, carries ethical weight and existential significance. Consciousness trained by suffering recognizes the interplay of consequence and intention. Action without awareness diminishes freedom, while deliberate, reflective action amplifies it. This understanding transforms ordinary life into a series of deliberate opportunities for moral and existential construction, where every moment is both a challenge and a possibility. Responsibility, once perceived as a burden, reveals itself as the necessary companion to freedom. To act consciously is to accept the weight of consequences, to anticipate outcomes, and to integrate understanding into ethical and principled engagement. Avoidance, neglect, or indifference compromises sovereignty, ceding authority to circumstance or impulse. True freedom flourishes in the space where responsibility is embraced as the defining characteristic of deliberate existence. Every act of attention, foresight, and ethical consideration strengthens the capacity for autonomous, principled engagement. Human connection provides both the medium and measure of freedom in action. Every interaction, whether fleeting or enduring, is a microcosm of moral and existential opportunity. Listening without judgment, extending patience, offering encouragement, and practicing empathy are not trivial acts, they are the mechanisms through which freedom is exercised relationally. Influence is realized not through recognition or dominance, but through the alignment of action with principle, integrity, and deliberate attentiveness. The liberated mind perceives that the quality of life is inseparable from the quality of engagement with others. Suffering serves as the instrument through which consciousness is refined. Pain clarifies values, illuminates priorities, and develops moral and existential discernment. Adversity forces confrontation with fear, limitation, and uncertainty, demanding deliberate response rather than passive endurance. Each challenge becomes an opportunity for insight, growth, and the reinforcement of ethical and existential capacities. The mind shaped by hardship recognizes that suffering is not an impediment to meaningful life, but the very medium through which freedom and understanding are realized. Time is the continuous canvas for deliberate action. Reflection on the past reveals patterns, lessons, and consequences that inform judgment. Attention to the present anchors awareness and guides principled engagement. Anticipation of the future fosters imagination, foresight, and preparation. Freedom, therefore, is exercised dynamically across the temporal spectrum. Each moment offers the possibility to construct meaning, enact ethical principles, and deepen sovereignty. Life is transformed into a deliberate sequence of conscious choices, each reinforcing freedom, responsibility, and ethical presence. Purpose crystallizes as the central axis around which all action revolves. It is neither abstract nor imposed, it is cultivated, internalized, and enacted. Work, creativity, mentorship, and self-reflection merge into a coherent project of meaning. Purpose transforms adversity into insight, challenge into opportunity, and ordinary experiences into instruments of significance. Consciousness that fully internalizes purpose exercises freedom moment by moment, aligning intention, thought, and action in service of coherent, principled existence. Solitude is the laboratory where freedom is refined. In reflective isolation, the mind rehearses ethical choices, anticipates dilemmas, and integrates fear, doubt, and past suffering. Sovereignty, attentiveness, and ethical clarity are consolidated, preparing the individual to act decisively in the broader world. Solitude is not emptiness, it is deliberate engagement with the self, a practice of consciousness in preparation for meaningful interaction, responsible action, and the continuous construction of significance. Gratitude and wonder transform ordinary experience into deliberate practice. Recognition of beauty, mindful attention to life, and the embrace of joy are ethical and existential exercises. Pleasure, abundance, and ordinary moments become opportunities to reinforce attentiveness, presence, and moral awareness. Consciousness shaped by suffering perceives every encounter, sensation, and opportunity as a platform to exercise freedom, construct meaning, and deepen ethical and existential sovereignty. Memory, imagination, and deliberate action form a triad guiding the conscious construction of life. Reflection illuminates past experiences, revealing insight, lessons, and consequences. Imagination anticipates possibilities, rehearses ethical decisions, and cultivates foresight. Deliberate action bridges understanding with reality, translating insight into principled engagement. Freedom is active and continuous within this triad. Each thought, decision, and act shapes life intentionally, ethically, and meaningfully. Suffering, internalized and understood, becomes the medium through which freedom reaches its fullest expression. Adversity clarifies priorities, strengthens resilience, and cultivates ethical and existential discernment. The mind that endures with awareness perceives clarity in confusion, opportunity in limitation, and insight in challenge. Every difficulty is transformed into an invitation to deliberate action, every loss a teacher, and every adversity a catalyst for moral and existential refinement. Freedom is realized when suffering is consciously integrated and transformed into deliberate, principled action. Work, creativity, and deliberate action converge with reflection and foresight to construct a coherent, significant, and enduring life. Influence is wielded not through recognition or authority but through principled engagement, attentive presence, and consistent ethical action. Every choice strengthens integrity, extends legacy, and ensures that meaning is constructed continuously. Excellence in thought, moral judgment, and deliberate practice becomes inseparable from the exercise of freedom and the creation of lasting significance. As the horizon of life stretches infinitely, the ultimate understanding emerges: freedom, suffering, responsibility, and purpose are inseparable. A life of profound significance is not measured by comfort, recognition, or avoidance of pain, but by the depth of attention, consistency of ethical engagement, and deliberate construction of meaning. Legacy is the cumulative outcome of principled, conscious action, extending influence and ethical presence beyond the individual. Consciousness shaped by adversity recognizes that significance is actively constructed, moment by moment, choice by choice, and action by action. Every act becomes a testament, every choice a declaration, every moment an exercise of ethical and existential sovereignty. The consciousness shaped by suffering, tempered through reflection, and animated by purpose moves forward fully, with clarity, integrity, and intentionality. Influence is wielded responsibly, legacy is continuously cultivated, and life itself becomes an expression of freedom, meaning, and principled engagement. In the quiet moments of reflection, I realize that freedom is not granted, it is claimed, moment by moment, through deliberate attention, ethical discernment, and principled action. It is a labor of consciousness, an ongoing engagement with the self and the world. Every thought, word, and gesture participates in the construction of meaning, shaping the moral and existential fabric of existence. Consciousness, once passive, becomes active, sovereign, and attuned, moving through life with the awareness that every choice is an opportunity to exercise freedom, to assert significance, and to act in alignment with purpose. The mastery of freedom emerges through suffering transformed into insight. Pain sharpens perception, adversity clarifies priorities, and challenge cultivates resilience. Those who endure consciously learn that every limitation is an invitation, every loss a teacher, and every difficulty an instrument for growth. The mind shaped by adversity perceives that freedom is not the absence of constraint but the capacity to respond with deliberation, integrity, and presence. Each trial becomes a crucible, each challenge a forge, and each suffering a medium for the refinement of ethical and existential sovereignty. Responsibility, inseparable from freedom, is the conscious acceptance of consequence. To act ethically and intentionally is to engage fully with the world, to recognize the weight of influence, and to integrate insight into principled action. Avoidance diminishes freedom, conscious engagement realizes it. Every act, from the smallest gesture to the most consequential decision, carries the potential to reinforce or erode significance. The liberated mind perceives responsibility not as an external imposition but as the essential mechanism through which freedom manifests and meaning is continuously constructed. Human relationships illuminate the relational nature of freedom. Every interaction provides an arena for attentiveness, empathy, and deliberate engagement. Listening without judgment, offering patience, and acting with care are instruments through which freedom is exercised in the world. Influence flows from presence, integrity, and alignment with ethical principles rather than recognition or dominance. Consciousness shaped by adversity understands that the quality of life is inseparable from the quality of relational engagement, and that freedom and significance are realized as much through connection as through individual sovereignty. Time is the medium of continuous freedom. Reflection on the past provides insight and understanding, present awareness grounds deliberate action, anticipation of the future cultivates foresight, imagination, and preparation. The liberated consciousness navigates this temporal continuum intentionally, transforming each moment into an opportunity for ethical engagement, deliberate action, and the construction of meaning. Life becomes a continuous exercise in principled attention, each moment a step in the ongoing realization of freedom, responsibility, and purpose. Purpose crystallizes as the axis of existence. Internalized and enacted, it aligns thought, intention, and action into a coherent trajectory. Work, creativity, mentorship, and self-reflection become expressions of this axis, producing coherence and depth. Adversity is transformed into insight, challenge into growth, and ordinary experience into meaningful action. Consciousness that embraces purpose exercises freedom fully, integrating suffering, reflection, and action into a singular, principled life of significance. Solitude serves as the crucible for refining freedom. In reflection, the mind rehearses ethical responses, integrates the shadows of doubt and fear, and consolidates sovereignty. This engagement with the self is not withdrawal but preparation, a practice of consciousness that fortifies presence, attentiveness, and principled action. Through solitude, freedom is deepened, clarity strengthened, and the capacity for ethical, deliberate engagement with the world is fully realized. Gratitude and wonder transform ordinary life into a deliberate practice of attention, reflection, and engagement. Recognition of beauty, mindful participation in experience, and appreciation for existence are acts that reinforce freedom, ethical awareness, and meaning. Pleasure and abundance are instruments for cultivating attentiveness, moral presence, and reflective engagement. Consciousness trained by suffering perceives every moment, sensation, and encounter as a platform to exercise freedom, construct significance, and integrate ethical and existential insight into life itself. Memory, imagination, and deliberate action form the triad of freedom. Reflection illuminates past experiences, revealing patterns and lessons. Imagination anticipates possibilities, rehearsing ethical choices and exploring potential outcomes. Deliberate action translates insight into reality, bridging understanding with principled engagement. Freedom is enacted within this triad, active, continuous, and inseparable from responsibility. Every thought, decision, and action shapes existence, meaning, and moral presence intentionally. Suffering becomes the medium through which freedom reaches its fullest expression. Adversity, limitation, and loss clarify priorities, strengthen resilience, and cultivate insight. The mind tempered by suffering perceives opportunity where others see obstruction, clarity where others see confusion, and possibility where others see defeat. Each difficulty is transformed into an instrument of deliberate action, every loss a catalyst for insight, and every challenge an occasion to exercise sovereign ethical engagement. Freedom is realized when suffering is consciously integrated and transformed into principled, deliberate action. Work, creativity, and action converge with reflection, foresight, and ethical attentiveness to construct a life of coherence, significance, and enduring impact. Influence is exercised through principled engagement and deliberate presence rather than authority or recognition. Every choice strengthens integrity, contributes to legacy, and ensures that meaning is continuously constructed. Excellence in thought, judgment, and deliberate practice becomes inseparable from the exercise of freedom and the ongoing creation of significance. As life unfolds toward its ultimate horizon, the final truth emerges: freedom, suffering, responsibility, and purpose are inseparably intertwined. A life of profound significance is measured not by comfort, recognition, or the avoidance of pain, but by the depth of attention, the consistency of ethical engagement, and the deliberate construction of meaning. Legacy is the cumulative effect of principled action, extending influence and ethical presence beyond the individual. Consciousness shaped by adversity recognizes that significance is continuously built, moment by moment, choice by choice, and act by act. Every act becomes a testament, every choice a declaration, every moment a conscious exercise of ethical and existential sovereignty. The mind shaped by suffering, tempered through reflection, and animated by deliberate purpose moves forward with clarity, integrity, and intentionality. Influence is wielded responsibly, legacy is cultivated continuously, and life itself becomes an expression of freedom, meaning, and principled engagement. In this realization, the ultimate liberation is found, the consciousness that has embraced suffering, responsibility, and purpose achieves the full and radiant expression of freedom. I have come to understand that the full exercise of freedom is inseparable from conscious engagement with life's complexity. It is not a passive state, nor a mere absence of constraint. Freedom manifests in deliberate action, ethical attentiveness, and reflective presence. Every thought, word, and gesture contributes to the architecture of existence, shaping both the inner landscape and the world that extends beyond the self. Consciousness, once passive or reactive, becomes sovereign, active, and purposeful, capable of transforming suffering into insight, limitation into opportunity, and loss into a teacher of resilience and clarity. Responsibility emerges as the necessary companion to freedom. It is not imposed externally but discovered internally as the natural consequence of awareness and agency. To act with deliberation is to acknowledge the ripple of influence every decision carries on self, on others, and on the continuum of existence. Avoidance, indifference, or superficial action diminishes sovereignty, while intentional, principled engagement realizes it fully. Responsibility is the instrument through which freedom gains substance and significance, transforming mere liberty into ethical presence and deliberate purpose. Human relationships reveal the practical dimension of this freedom. Each connection is an arena of moral and existential engagement, a mirror reflecting the integrity and intentionality of action. Listening attentively, offering patience, extending compassion, and acting with care are not trivial. They are the means through which freedom exercises influence and constructs meaning in the world. True engagement is relational as much as individual. Consciousness shaped by suffering recognizes that ethical presence and attentiveness to others are inseparable from the exercise of freedom, and that relational integrity amplifies the depth and significance of life. Suffering, once consciously integrated, becomes the teacher of liberation. Pain clarifies values, exposes priorities, and develops resilience. Adversity forces confrontation with fear, limitation, and loss, demanding deliberate and principled response. Each challenge is transformed into an instrument of insight, each difficulty into an opportunity for growth, and each trial into a medium for the cultivation of ethical and existential clarity. The mind honed through hardship recognizes that freedom is realized not in ease, but in the conscious transformation of adversity into deliberate, meaningful engagement. Time becomes the continuous canvas for freedom. Reflection on the past reveals lessons, consequences, and patterns of action. Presence in the now anchors attention, guiding deliberate choices and principled behavior. Anticipation of the future cultivates foresight, imagination, and preparation. The liberated consciousness navigates this temporal spectrum intentionally, transforming each moment into an opportunity for ethical engagement, deliberate action, and the construction of significance. Life, in this understanding, is not a passive progression of events but a continuous practice of deliberate, principled freedom. Purpose crystallizes as the central axis around which action and thought revolve. It is not abstract, imposed, or fixed, but cultivated, internalized, and enacted. Work, creation, mentorship, and reflection merge into a coherent project of significance. Purpose transforms suffering into insight, challenge into opportunity, and ordinary experience into instruments of ethical and existential growth. Consciousness that embraces purpose exercises freedom fully, integrating adversity, reflection, and deliberate action into a life of coherence, meaning, and impact. Solitude serves as the crucible of freedom. In reflective isolation, the mind rehearses ethical choices, anticipates challenges, and integrates fear, doubt, and past suffering. Sovereignty, attentiveness, and moral clarity are strengthened, preparing the individual to act decisively in the broader world. Solitude is not withdrawal but intentional engagement with the self, a rehearsal for deliberate, ethical, and meaningful action. It is here that consciousness consolidates insight, fortifies purpose, and deepens the capacity for principled freedom. Gratitude and wonder transform the ordinary into a practice of attention and reflection. Recognition of beauty, mindful participation in life, and appreciation for existence itself are deliberate acts of presence and engagement. Pleasure, abundance, and ordinary moments become instruments to reinforce attentiveness, moral awareness, and the conscious exercise of freedom. Consciousness shaped by suffering perceives that each encounter, sensation, and opportunity is a platform to construct meaning, assert significance, and integrate ethical insight into the lived experience of life. memory, imagination, and deliberate action form the triad through which freedom is enacted. Reflection illuminates past experience, revealing lessons and insight. Imagination explores potential futures, rehearsing ethical responses and cultivating foresight. Deliberate action translates understanding into reality, bridging insight with tangible engagement. Freedom, within this triad, is active, continuous, and inseparable from responsibility. Every thought, decision, and action becomes a vehicle for shaping existence, meaning, and moral presence intentionally. Suffering, once consciously integrated, becomes the crucible for complete freedom. Pain, limitation, and loss reveal the fragility and urgency of life, cultivating ethical clarity, resilience, and insight. The mind tempered by adversity perceives opportunity within obstruction, clarity within confusion, and growth within challenge. Each trial is an instrument of deliberate action, every difficulty a catalyst for moral and existential refinement. True freedom is realized when suffering is transformed through conscious reflection, principled engagement, and ethical action, integrating adversity into the architecture of meaningful life. Work, creativity, and action converge with reflection, foresight, and ethical attentiveness to construct a coherent, enduring, and significant life. Influence is exercised through principled engagement rather than recognition or authority. Each deliberate choice strengthens integrity, extends legacy, and ensures that meaning is continuously constructed. Excellence in thought, judgment, and intentional practice becomes inseparable from the exercise of freedom and the ongoing creation of significance. As life's horizon extends toward the inevitable unknown, the ultimate truth emerges: freedom, suffering, responsibility, and purpose are inseparably intertwined. A life of profound significance is measured not by comfort, recognition, or avoidance of pain, but by attentiveness, ethical consistency, and the continuous construction of meaning. Legacy is cumulative, created through principled, deliberate action, and extending influence beyond the self. Consciousness shaped by adversity recognizes that significance is constructed actively, moment by moment, choice by choice, and act by act. Every act becomes a testament, every choice a declaration, every moment an exercise of ethical and existential sovereignty. The consciousness shaped by suffering, tempered through reflection, and animated by deliberate purpose moves forward with clarity, integrity, and intentionality. Influence is wielded responsibly, legacy is continuously cultivated, and life itself becomes an expression of freedom, meaning, and principled engagement. In this realization, the ultimate liberation is attained, the consciousness that has embraced suffering, responsibility, and purpose achieves the radiant, sovereign, and enduring expression of true freedom. I now perceive with absolute clarity that the essence of freedom is inseparable from conscious engagement with existence in its entirety. Freedom is not the absence of adversity, nor a passive detachment from the trials of life. It is the deliberate, reflective exercise of the mind and spirit, the sovereign application of insight, intention, and ethical attention to every thought, every word, and every act. Consciousness, once dormant or reactive, awakens fully when suffering is acknowledged, understood, and integrated, transforming limitation into insight, loss into illumination, and challenge into opportunity for principled, meaningful action. Every human being carries within themselves the capacity to claim this freedom, yet its exercise is not automatic. It requires vigilant attention, ethical discernment, and courage. One must choose, continually, to act consciously rather than succumb to instinct or habit. To be fully alive is to recognize that every micro-decision ripples outward, influencing the self, others, and the moral texture of the world. Freedom, therefore, is both a privilege and a responsibility, continuously renewed in every encounter, every thought, and every deliberate act. Responsibility is the natural counterpart to freedom. It is not externally imposed but discovered as the necessary medium through which liberty acquires substance. Conscious action implies accountability. To choose deliberately is to accept the weight of consequence, to anticipate outcomes, and to integrate moral and existential awareness into each decision. Avoidance diminishes sovereignty, while engagement cultivates it. The mind that exercises freedom understands that ethical responsibility is not a constraint, it is the very mechanism through which freedom becomes tangible, meaningful, and transformative. Human relationships reveal the profound relational dimension of freedom. Each interaction, from a brief exchange to an enduring bond, is a space in which moral and existential integrity is tested and exercised. Listening attentively, offering patience, extending compassion, and acting with deliberate care are instruments of freedom enacted in the world. Influence arises not from authority, recognition, or coercion but from principled presence, integrity, and ethical alignment. Consciousness shaped by suffering perceives that the depth and quality of life is inseparable from relational engagement, that freedom is realized not in isolation but in the deliberate exercise of attention and care toward others. Suffering, when consciously integrated, becomes the teacher of ultimate liberation. Pain clarifies priorities, strengthens moral discernment, and cultivates resilience. Adversity compels confrontation with fear, limitation, and uncertainty, demanding deliberate response rather than passive endurance. Each trial, each moment of anguish, each challenge offers insight, ethical refinement, and the opportunity to cultivate sovereign consciousness. The liberated mind sees adversity not as a barrier but as a medium through which freedom, significance, and understanding are realized. Time functions as the arena in which freedom is continuously enacted. Reflection on the past reveals patterns, lessons, and consequences that inform judgment. Attention to the present anchors deliberate action and ethical engagement. Imagination of the future cultivates foresight, anticipation, and ethical preparation. Consciousness navigates this temporal landscape intentionally, transforming each moment into a deliberate exercise in ethical presence, principled action, and the construction of enduring meaning. Life becomes a dynamic practice, where freedom is not static but continuously performed, reaffirmed, and deepened. Purpose crystallizes as the guiding axis of existence. It is internalized, enacted, and made tangible through action, creativity, work, mentorship, and reflection. Purpose transforms suffering into insight, challenge into opportunity, and ordinary experiences into instruments of significance. Consciousness aligned with purpose exercises freedom fully, integrating adversity, reflection, and deliberate action into a coherent, principled, and meaningful life. Every action, every decision, every engagement becomes a reflection of intentionality, ethical awareness, and existential sovereignty. Solitude, far from isolation, is the laboratory in which freedom is refined. In reflective contemplation, the mind rehearses ethical decisions, anticipates challenges, integrates doubt, fear, and past suffering, and consolidates the capacity for deliberate, principled action. Solitude is preparation, a deliberate engagement with the self that strengthens sovereignty, attentiveness, and moral clarity. From this sanctuary, consciousness emerges capable of engaging the world decisively, ethically, and meaningfully. Gratitude and wonder infuse life with purpose and attentiveness. Recognition of beauty, mindful participation in existence, and appreciation for the ordinary and extraordinary moments are deliberate exercises in ethical and existential engagement. Pleasure, abundance, and the smallest joys reinforce awareness, attentiveness, and principled presence. Consciousness shaped by suffering perceives every encounter, sensation, and opportunity as a platform to exercise freedom, cultivate significance, and integrate insight into lived experience. Memory, imagination, and deliberate action form the triad of practical freedom. Reflection illuminates the past, revealing lessons, consequences, and insight. Imagination anticipates possibilities, rehearses ethical choices, and cultivates foresight. Deliberate action translates insight into reality, bridging understanding with tangible engagement. Within this triad, freedom is dynamic, continuous, and inseparable from responsibility. Every choice, thought, and act shapes existence, meaning, and moral presence intentionally and consciously. Suffering, consciously integrated, becomes the medium of complete freedom. Pain, limitation, and loss reveal life's fragility and urgency, cultivate resilience, and sharpen ethical and existential perception. The mind tempered by adversity perceives clarity where others see confusion, opportunity where others perceive constraint, and growth where others see defeat. Each trial becomes an instrument of principled action, every difficulty a catalyst for insight, and every adversity a conduit for the full expression of freedom. True liberation is realized when suffering is consciously transformed into deliberate, principled action, integrated into the architecture of meaningful life. Work, creativity, and action converge with reflection, foresight, and ethical attentiveness to construct a coherent, enduring, and significant life. Influence is exercised through principled engagement, deliberate presence, and moral attention rather than authority or recognition. Every choice strengthens integrity, contributes to legacy, and ensures that meaning is continuously constructed. Excellence in thought, judgment, and ethical action becomes inseparable from the exercise of freedom and the ongoing creation of significance. As the final horizon of life emerges, the ultimate truth stands revealed: freedom, suffering, responsibility, and purpose are inseparably intertwined. A life of profound significance is measured not by comfort, recognition, or avoidance of pain, but by attentiveness, consistency in ethical engagement, and the continuous construction of meaning. Legacy is cumulative, shaped by deliberate, principled action, extending influence beyond the self. Consciousness forged through adversity recognizes that significance is built actively, moment by moment, choice by choice, and action by action. Every act becomes a testament, every choice a declaration, every moment an exercise of ethical and existential sovereignty. The mind shaped by suffering, tempered through reflection, and animated by deliberate purpose moves forward with clarity, integrity, and intentionality. Influence is wielded responsibly, legacy is continuously cultivated, and life itself becomes a living expression of freedom, meaning, and principled engagement. In this realization, the ultimate liberation is attained, the consciousness that has embraced suffering, responsibility, and purpose achieves the radiant, sovereign, and enduring expression of true freedom, and in that expression, I find the final revelation, that the purpose of all suffering, the culmination of all challenge, and the end of all striving is not a state to reach, but a continuous practice, a conscious, deliberate, ethical, and meaningful engagement with existence itself. The liberated mind is not simply alive, it is awake, sovereign, and radiant, fully capable of transforming every moment, every experience, and every encounter into a reflection of the highest possibility of human freedom.